So now we know who the people who really, really care about technology and art. The weather is a little bit against us, but of course, thanks to technology, we're going to be out on the internet in a few days. So thank you, Mari Spirito and Annelie Graf, for organizing these sessions. Thank you, as always, for Art Basel, for doing this wonderful little sideshow to the main event. We had a meeting earlier this week with a salon session with a whole bunch of people from Argentina. It was incredible. But turning to the issue at hand, we're here to talk about technology and the art world. And I'm going to start off with a proposition, which maybe you agree with, maybe you don't. I think that we agree that technology hasn't uprooted the art world in the same way that it has disrupted, let's say, newspapers or the taxi business, which doesn't mean, by the way, that I was able to get a taxi with Uber last night, so everything is not great. But our world really hasn't changed in the same way as those ones. If you think about the taxi business or you think about newspapers, those worlds have been completely turned upside down. You can barely recognize them compared to the time that you were growing up. And if you think of our models, whether they're institutional models like museums or our commercial models, especially our galleries and our auction houses, even our social patterns of behavior, they're more or less quite similar to what they looked like when Google just meant a pair of binoculars. So why is that? I would like to put it to you that the reason why we haven't changed as much is because we have the most complex data. And maybe that's a romantic thing to say, and I have much smarter people next to me who make it their business to think about technology, but I think we have the most sophisticated, the most complicated, the least algorithmic information, full of metaphors, full of interpretation, full of context, and it's just that it represents a tremendously great information management challenge. Less so when it comes to, let's say, prices on the art market, but as you get into the interpretive and the meaningful context of art, it is the most complicated kind of data that humanity has invented. So my proposition is that the algorithm hasn't yet caught up with us, at least not yet. So that is why today's panel had a deliberate question mark attached to it in its title. Our title was, Has Technology Really Changed the Art World? And it sort of implies a kind of skeptical, slightly healthy skepticism about the question of how much technology has led to change. So we thought it would be a healthy and good thing to do to ask some questions. How far along are we in this process of technological change in the art world? Have things changed deeply, or has so far change primarily been around the edges? And I think most important to all of us here, what's about to happen? What's going to happen next? So maybe after a couple of decades of incipient technology change, we're at the cusp of more profound, more systemic, more game-changing alterations in our institutions and our markets. And we have the absolutely perfect group to debate these points. As you can see, since they're all interested in technology, they're all wearing black today, and they're super casual. And that's great. We have Simon Denny, the wonderful artist. I'm going to say more about them later. Christiane, who curates digital new media arts at the Whitney Museum and does many other things. Laurent Gaveau at the end, who's with the Google Cultural Lab in Paris, and the wonderful Sebastian Cwilich from Artsy. Give them a hand now, because they're going to give you wonderful thoughts later. Before we actually get into it, I just want to clear away some obvious points so you don't have to waste time with them. Of course, change is happening. It's happening on many fronts. Artists are using technology, as we all do, for research and, in various ways. Institutions, of course, are using tech to research their audiences, to market what they do, to present what they do. Art discourse is largely shifted online, for better or for worse. Market players are, of course, using technology to promote and to transact, and technology is helping people get closer to art in all kinds of media, including social media. 23% of consumers and 44% of millennials now discover art through social media, which is particularly interesting because only 20% indicate the museum as their primary source of learning about art, and only 16% visit galleries. The online market is growing. I'm sure Sebastian would like to tell us about that later on. Apparently it grew 24% in 2014. It's supposed to be around $3.25 billion in transactions in 2015, expected to be 20 billion. I don't know who counts these things, but those are the numbers that we found. About a quarter of galleries offer now the option to buy art online. Startup investment in 2015 was about $500 million in technology, art technology startups. And every day it seems we hear announcements of new launches. Actually, just this week, some of you may have heard that the .art domain name was launched, which is going to be the corner of the internet that's devoted to all things art. And in the beginning, it's now major institutions, artists that are beginning to adopt this title. But in the end, .art domains will be given down to singular individual objects as well. So that's one of the newest launches that we've heard about. So changes in the air, but how exactly? Simon, we're going to start with you. They're all going to talk a little bit, and then we're going to talk together, and then we're going to take questions, and then we're going to have, I don't know, fun. So Simon, of course we start with you because you're our token artist on our panel, and it is in the end about you. I think many of you, those of you who were lucky enough to be in Venice for the biennial last time, Simon's work in the New Zealand Pavilion, to me, was one of the highlights in Venice. You are originally from New Zealand. You're with Petzel in New York. And your work frequently explores sort of intersections of art, society, technology. Recently, you've been fascinated with Bitcoin and things like that. So how has technology changed your life as an artist?
Yeah, well, thank you for the nice introduction, and thanks for having me here. I actually think the things that you mentioned, kind of just reeled off very quickly there, for me are quite fundamental things and kind of like quite massive things. So even though they don't kind of seem like such big things, just kind of like using email and I don't know, the kind of ways that technology has kind of affected everybody kind of who has a computer in the world, I think those are the same things that affect me as an artist. But that's not to say that they're small. So I think that the way that I receive information, the way that I kind of like communicate with friends and other artists, the way I keep up with practices, yeah, just the way in which one communicates with everybody in one's life, these things massively change how one behaves. So it's not that I've got like a flashing device on the sculpture or whatever. It's not that my work is being shown in kind of radically different digital places or friends of mine. But it's more that just the way that we evolve as humans and kind of learn things and process things are so heavily influenced by this communications technology. And that, of course, influences the way that I think about the world and think about art. So I think that's the most profound thing. And it looks like nothing, but it's quite kind of massive. And I think what we've just seen with the election results recently here in the US and other things around the world, the way media and communications is going radically influences the way people think and kind of radically changes the way people think and behave. So I think as an artist, that's the biggest thing, is these very kind of under the surface things, you know.
When we talked earlier on the phone, we always have these conversations, and you called it an unspectacular takeover.
Right. Exactly, yeah, it feels, I mean, because it kind of creeps up on us, right? It's like, I didn't decide one day that every single news item I would read would probably come from my news feed on Facebook, but that's how my life is now, almost, you know, and I'm kind of actively trying to break the so-called filter bubble and think about ways to do that, and art is, and has been, in and of itself, quite a massive filter bubble, I guess. Even traditionally, I guess it's a small conversation, right? That has ambitions to be a larger conversation. But these technologies like the Facebook feed, which kind of curate the content so much to my preferences, means I don't see this or that piece of news. I think that, yeah, just heavily influences the way I can think and act. So yeah, it's an unspectacular takeover because you also don't know that it's happening. You know, when you're reading your Facebook feed and when you get this information, it looks like a bunch of diverse voices, right? It looks like you're getting kind of like a lot of different angles, but of course that's not really the case. So that's, yeah, it's kind of sneaking up on me how these kind of how the people that design these systems have a huge amount of control over. Well, maybe that's not the right way of saying it, but the way these systems are designed has a huge amount of influence over the way I think and therefore act as an artist. Yeah.
Well, this actually also connects to the picture that's up there.
Right.
So you have taken technology as a topic for your work as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, my work, for those who don't know it, kind of deals with the people that make and lead technological change in terms of communication. So this is a board game, an edition of Risk, dedicated to a banker, Blythe Masters, who's at the forefront of changing the banking industry and the financial technology industry using this kind of technology behind Bitcoin called blockchain. And there's lots of different things that people are building on this technology. It's basically like a networked way of kind of replacing an elite third-party kind of verification. So if I were to pay you money, in the past we would have a bank saying yes, and people at the bank making sure that was the case. Very, very simply, of course, for those who know about blockchain. And now we have this kind of encrypted network technology that does it for us. So the implication is if you don't need kind of a third party to say, yes, this actually happened, this can change a lot of things. And and this is one of the first industries that's being really affected by that is the banking industry.
What is, as an artist who was trained in an art school, what in your education has prepared you to even make technology a deep subject for you? Was there anything that prepared you for that?
No, I mean, I didn't really think that I would be making art about technology when I started making art. It was kind of the world which took me in that direction. So I was living in New Zealand. I went to a kind of great art program in Auckland. I kind of learned how to make sculpture because I went through the sculpture department because I was attracted to the people teaching sculpture there. I started making, I guess, what would be seen as quite traditional things that look a bit like arte povera. That was kind of like my starting point. And then I decided to move to Germany and go to a second art school in Germany. And I moved away from my hometown, and basically all I had with me was this computer, my laptop. And this was 2007. So this was kind of like an important year also for technology. This is when the iPhone was born. This is when, I guess social media really took off in like a massive, massive way. Like Facebook was really kind of adopted properly in 2007, 2008 in terms of the scale that it has now. And so, yeah, coincidentally, when I moved away and when this laptop became the most important thing in my life because I was speaking to my parents through it, I was speaking to my friends through it, I was learning things through it for school, I was watching all the movies that I watched. It was kind of everything happened through this portal. I suddenly thought, oh, if I'm interested in the power of objects and how they have an effect on the body. I mean, I was interested in kind of phenomenology at that point. I was like, well, what about this object? This is like the most important object in my life. And then I kind of started to make work about screens, but then kind of I realized that actually the object wasn't the most important thing. It was kind of like a package for what was possible. And this is what I mean about the things that I was talking about earlier. It was about what this object meant to in terms of what I was getting and how I was getting it. So it was the people who was defining not only the hardware but also the infrastructure and the software that became my topic then. So I started to look at entrepreneurs and people dreaming up these systems. I started to go to tech conferences and listen to these people speak about what they were doing. And that's kind of where I started to kind of follow these tech visionaries.
All right. Well, we'll come back to all that, and I think we'll move on to Christiane. Christiane, you are sort of the sense maker. You're a curator. You're someone who helps us understand and interpret this world. You wear many hats. You're a professor at the New School. You're obviously a curator at the Whitney Museum. You're also a writer. I'm happy to say you just won a prestigious award for art writing from the Toma Foundation this week, as I understand it. Um, you also created, you're responsible for the Whitney's digital media site called Artworld. You wrote a wonderful essay called Debating Disruption. Actually, everybody on this panel seems to dislike the term disruption. So I've learned this in preparing for this panel, that when you talk to tech people, you're not supposed to say disruption because that's like very 2014, that term. So tell us how technology is changing our relationship to art.
I'm going to pick up where you left off and start with disruption again, which became such a catchword for the challenges and trends in the tech world, and then was like very quickly adopted by, let's say, the Tribeca Film Festival for the Disruptive Innovation Award. So very quickly it became establishment itself. But I'm going to use the term for the sake of this panel to talk a little bit about the disruptions that have been happening. And Simon has already pointed out that a lot of disruption has happened to the art object, or at least the digital art object. What you're looking at here is an image from Brad Trammell's and Laurent Christiane's Tumblr, The Jogging, and all of the pieces on there are ultimately just conceptual propositions. They are presented as art objects. Many of them do not exist or will ever exist. They're just images that are being presented to the public. Websites, of course, and the sale of websites has been a challenge to the market. You're looking at Raphael Rosendaal's piece here, and he has come up with a website sales contract where he basically creates a domain name for each individual work. Then we have pieces in the collection of the Whitney, such as one of Ian Chang's baby feet. And this piece, it actually should be a video playing. It creates its visuals out of a conversation between chatbots. And these are third-party services. So suddenly we have an object in the collection that relies on third-party services and chatbots. So I think a lot has been going on when it comes to the art object, and I would need the next slide to continue. Anyone?
See, this is what technology does to us.
Yeah.
We become slaves to it.
Precisely.
It's the silent takeover.
Yeah, because it makes it much easier if you see what I'm talking about. So on the one hand, you have really notions of the art object being challenged. That being said, I also, of course, want to point out that we don't see that many of these pieces within the art fairs here. For a good reason. So there's not only a disruption of the art object, there's also a disruption of curation to some extent. We see more and more crowdsourced pieces, and then I think this doesn't work anymore, and I might just continue talking about it. Okay. Augmented reality has also offered new possibilities of showing work in public. So this is from the Manifest AR collectives We Are in MoMA, where they basically just staged an exhibition of augmented reality within the MoMA without MoMA's knowledge. I mean, they learned about it very late. We do not need the museum per se anymore to present these pieces. Prototype, an exhibition in the cloud, was a collaboration between Parsons and the University of Arts in Berlin, where all of the objects were basically prototyped, rapid prototyped within the exhibition space itself, so a different kind of model. I think there's no doubt that digital technologies are disrupting exhibitions and the experience thereof. We so much see art now through our mobile devices. You will see QR codes, hashtags on museum labels inviting people to contribute. Museums such as MoMA have their Twitter channels and feeds. We now have Museum Selfie Day on January 18th.
God save us.
You know, wonderful, as if we needed more of the selfies. Museum curators are actually doing promotion of their shows, of their institutions through Instagram. You may have heard about this piece at the Met, which was presented right when the restored statue was being revealed. So this is actually an avatar that is manipulated by a live actor who responds to the audience. And as you see in this picture, there's only one person looking at the actual statue. That's on view here. Then, of course, the Google Cultural Institute has presented us with new views of the art beyond what the human eye could see, and you're probably going to talk a little bit about that later, or offered us opportunities to visit galleries all over the world. And I think we've also seen a lot of experimentation with collection right now. Collection of digital pieces. There are companies such as Depict, which will sell you a frame, and together with that frame, a collection that is being streamed live into it. Companies such as Sedition or Data Editions are selling you work, and I want to make very clear that what we are looking at is a shift to licensing models. You never have this work on your hard drive. You're streaming it into your phone, into your tablet at different scales, which I think is highly problematic. So all of these models are still under development, and I don't know where exactly they will go. And then, of course, as you already mentioned, auctions are also experimenting with that. So to bring it all down to a few answers, have technologies uprooted the art world as is? No, they haven't. They have had a major impact on it, though. And I think that one of the most important changes is that we experience art more through mediation than in the real world. And I think that has tremendous implications.
Well, this is actually a wonderful baseline for our conversation, because the next two people I want to pull in are really building the future actively. But I do want to just stick with you for one question, which is, of all the things you quickly presented to us, and thank you for that, because it was a good tour d'horizon, which one do you think is sort of the most consequential of all the things you just talked about, curation, art, blah, blah, blah?
I honestly think that it's all of them together, because they create a different kind of idea of art. When I talk to young artists or my students, I more and more realize that the distinction between the copy and the original doesn't matter to them anymore. What does that mean for an art collector, for example, if they become collectors? Does huge editioning not matter to them anymore? And another experience that I found very telling I had this week was I presented an artist's work, and the work consists of sculptures in physical space, but they are highly digital images that are actually wrapped around a form. And despite the fact that I had talked about them for more than 5 minutes, and the artist had, one of the questions we got was, so what is this actually in space? What is the artwork? And to that person, it still was not clear whether the artwork consisted of a photoshopped image of something in a gallery space, or if there actually was a real work. And to me, that was absolutely fascinating in the perception of art.
Well, Laurent, you have first of all, you have a great job.
I agree.
So you helped set up and run the Google Art Lab in Paris. I think everybody here would love to know what Google is up to in the art world. The art project, the Google Art Project, now has partnerships with about 1,000 institutions and archives. In general, this is a part of Google that gave us Google Cardboard, or now you have this new platform called Dream. Tilt Brush, which is maybe you could talk about for a minute. It's a new artistic tool to sort of create forms in digital space. But you're coming from the very established art sector. You were at Versailles, you were at the Centre Pompidou, and you've been working a lot on building bridges to curators. I was talking to Hans Ulrich. I think he's doing something with you. You've invited artists to sort of think about what Google can do. So what is Google doing? And more importantly, where are we going? And how are we adapting to this technology?
So maybe a little bit of history to understand what Google is doing now. We started 5 years ago, what is called the Google Cultural Institute. It started as a 20-person project, actually. One guy in the company was working 20% of his time, because we are allowed to do that, on a very personal project which was trying to build those bridges between art institutions, museums, and the team of engineers or some tool that Google have developed. It was very experimental with 17 major fine art museums in the Western world, to make it short. And you presented some of the first results, which were the street view tour of the inside of the museum, which were the digitization in super high resolution of some masterworks. It's been a success, and so the company decided to make it a long-term commitment and not an experimental project anymore, which was when the Culture Institute was founded in Paris and London, which in a company like Google, long-term commitment means hiring engineers, and now we have a team of about 30 engineers fully committed to building those tools for the cultural sector. 5 years ago, we were actually considered, mostly by the press, as disruptive around the street view tour, around the zoom into images. It was not really our perception, to be honest, especially first because we were partnering with those institutions, so not coming into an ecosystem and deciding to change everything. And also because we were seeing ourselves enhancing the experience or offering something different, exactly what you explained, but not exactly competing with anything that would constitute the cultural or art landscape by that time. Very recently, 2 years ago, we opened the lab in Paris, which I am very happy to run, and which is a place for research and development, where we invite our partners, some artists in residency, to work very closely with some engineers on some pilot project, and to figure out what are the next tools, solutions we could provide to our partners in the coming years. So for now, I'd say we have 2 areas of focus, one being virtual reality. 2 engineers 3 years ago came with the idea of cardboard, the virtual reality headset made of cardboard, which was meant to actually offer to our partners a quick and cheap way for them to present their premises in an immersive way, and became such a success worldwide that everybody forgot who invented it, but it's okay. And so virtual reality is one of our areas of focus. The other one being machine learning and art, how machine learning and artificial intelligence can be a tool for artists, can also be a tool for curator, can be a tool to browse or sort or find visual similarities within a large data set of content. That's to summarize where we are.
And I know you've been inviting artists. What does that mean exactly? I mean, I have a feeling that someone like this guy, he would like to sort of lift the hood a little bit and poke inside Google. Are you going to sort of get inside the algorithms? And because that's sort of where the fun starts, I think, for artists.
I agree. So we started 3 years ago inviting artists in residency in Paris, in partnership with Anthony Chobris and Simon Questet as part of their project 89+, which I know you're very familiar with. And for the one who would not know it, it's a cartography of practitioners born after 89 worldwide. And sometimes when Ulrich and Simon detect an artist who would need some help or some support from an engineering team, or whose goals are aligned with what we can offer in terms of resources, well, basically they send him or her to the lab in Paris, and we work for 2 or 3 months to help them materialize their vision. It's been a wonderful journey for the past 3 years. We are right now 3 artists from Africa, from Ghana, South Africa, and Ethiopia in the lab, and more to come.
Great. Sebastian is a good friend. It's nice to see you on this panel. Everybody also wants to know what Artsy is up to. This is, I think it's fair to say at this point, Artsy is probably the most widely recognized online platform, part of this new ecology that has been emerging, sort of a poster child for art in a digital age. This is a platform that now has about 5,000 partners. You're president and COO. You also come from the established Artworld, or the more transactional side. You've been at Christie's. You were involved with Haunch of Venison. but of course you have a background at Bell Labs as an engineer and consulted with many companies. And before that, you were in Buenos Aires, where you set up an art school. So you can respond to all this stuff, but what I'm actually curious about is that when you describe a world to your investors, of whom there have been quite a few, clearly you've made a very convincing presentation to some very smart people about where the world is going. What is the universe you describe to them that Artsy is helping to build?
All right, so first, thank you, and it's great to be here with people from this kind of broad spectrum of the art world. I guess I start from kind of an axiomatic way that technology absolutely changes everything. I don't think the mechanism is necessarily disruption. I think it's evolved, as everyone has said, to kind of more of a partnership model. But when you see, my son is now 6. When he was 2 in the earlier days of Artsy, he was swiping the TV screen. And it was absolutely clear to me that, in that act, you see that a 2-year-old who can barely speak just understands intuitively kind of the technology around him. And it is not going to be a debate in 10 or 20 years. Kind of, will people buy art online? Will people, everything is online. It will be even the very phones. We were having an interesting conversation. Andras was saying, like, when I imagined the future, I didn't expect to be in a subway car with everyone kind of like looking down at their phones, and it looks kind of like dystopian. And yesterday I was mentioning that to our CTO, and he was saying, well, that's just like a transitional thing. Like, it'll eventually just all be embedded, and you'll just like kind of point up, and here things will appear. And so this is just like kind of like the clumsy early stages of everyone having a computer on them. So I think that's from kind of premise. I'm very much a kind of radical technologist and believe that everything will change. I think in the art world in particular, you're dealing with the very top of, if you look at it from a commercial perspective, kind of the top of the luxury pyramid, right? You can look at art as you're selling $50 worth of paint and canvas for traditional art for an arbitrarily large sum of money. Or if you look at it from a cultural context, it's kind of the most important cultural artifacts that we create. And from either of those contexts, because it's the very, very top, it means that people are rightly incredibly concerned about context around whom they partner with, around whom they associate with. And in the very early days of Artsy, it was a bunch of us going around to galleries and essentially like getting CDs of images and trying to convince the galleries to give us CDs of images. And I think today, for people a little less familiar with it, there's about 5,000 partners that we work with. We do one part, which is essentially a marketing and promotional platform for galleries, art fairs, etc., as well as providing tools for them to manage their artworks. We have a marketplace component, and so when you talk about kind of how much has changed, it's very much been through partnership, but you see now in the direct selling on Artsy, a recent Philips auction, 1/3 of all their bids came through the Artsy platform. So all the people bidding in the room, all the people who were on the phone, all the people who had left absentee bids, 1/3 coming from a platform like Artsy. And so it's very clear that that's having an impact. And then in the media space that we spoke about at the beginning, we have an editorial platform. So we began a little bit with the premise that if you are, if you're talking about images, isn't it crazy that it's we started talking about this maybe in 2013 or so. Isn't it crazy that we're talking and writing about art without actually being able to see the art we're talking about? And so we said, if we're putting all the world's art on one platform and kind of envision this world where art is as popular a part of culture as music is today, shouldn't a lot of that kind of writing about the art have the images along with it? And so now we've created an editorial platform, which is the most read arts publication in the world. And if you can have a publication in 3.5 years become the most read arts publication, it means things are definitely changing. And then what I'd kind of end with in terms of the future and what I see kind of potentially happening is, you know, investors ask a lot about the total addressable market. So what is the TAM of the business you're in? And it's really good to be in a business like Google because everyone needs to search everything, and organizing all the world's information feels like a pretty big TAM, and so investors get really excited about it. And the art market is relatively small by that standard. But if you think about it, I think it's very much of our own making. I think we've been, as an industry, and I speak very much as someone that holds myself responsible for that as well, we've created a universe that's quite intimidating. Whether it's to walk into a gallery, traditionally to walk into museums, because I think it's changed a lot. You know, at the very beginning days of Artsy, people would say, I don't want to share my collection. It's somehow almost this idea that like the aura of the artwork, if you put it online, etc. And just in 5 years, it's dramatically changed, right? Or even the fact that you have platforms like Artsy and others where you have both works that are for sale right next to works from museums, right? But what I think is happening now is that as, you know, maybe there's this traditionally relatively small art world, but you have all these forces of kind of, and you have more and more accessibility as all institutions kind of embrace platforms like Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, etc., that get kind of visual culture and art out to a broader audience. And I think there's an argument to be made that as you know, our president-elect's kind of promise to halt globalization notwithstanding, I think as artificial intelligence and robots start to essentially do more and more of the manual work, there's a question about what are we going to devote ourselves to doing. And I think a lot of that will be creative, kind of experiencing and consuming art, or arguably becoming artists ourselves, right? Like, what else is there to do when the robots are kind of doing everything? And there was an interesting, I was on a panel earlier this week with Alexandra Cunningham, and she was saying that one way to look at people's kind of, and maybe it's a very optimistic and kind way of people kind of their Instagram feeds, their Facebook feeds, etc., is essentially all mini art projects, right? You're creating this like carefully curated, very kind of crafted and artificial representation of your reality. And so maybe we're already all becoming artists in some sense. And when you see that there is in countries around Europe kind of universal basic income referendums, etc., you know, maybe we're going kind of to a world where the TAM of the art market is actually absolutely everywhere.
Amen. That would be a very nice world. Not sure that that's where we're going, but it's another subject for another panel. One thing that is striking about what you're saying is that, you know, it used to be the world I grew up in. There was the universe of museums and disinterested aesthetic contemplation, if you will. There was the universe of transactional art engagement, and there was, you know, a somewhat separate universe of discourse about art and criticism. And the way these three have completely begun to blend and come together in a kind of very Catholic way on Artsy is certainly an indicator of the future. So as I want to touch on a few topics for all of us here, but that's exactly where one of the questions I wanted to ask you. So if the beginning of this transition, this shift was, you know, I don't know, the first museum websites in, I don't know, 94, those clumsy things, and if the end game is we're all sitting around at home because we get free money from the States because of universal basic income, and all we do is absorb this content through some sort of chip in our brains. Where are we in this transition from here to here? Roughly, where would you say? Are we at a midpoint? Are we at a quarter? What would you all, how do you all think of this as a narrative?
Yeah. I would say we're kind of halfway through, but I don't necessarily agree that the end of that trajectory is where we should be going. I think we now have created enough of a monster out of the machine that we're beginning to reassess what's going on. There is a lot of backlash about the filter bubbles, about really the world we're creating. Coming back to some of the points Sebastian made, for example, if you're thinking about TAM, again, many of my students tell me, I don't know what art is anymore. To them, art, entertainment, the digital field, it's all leveled. And so perhaps, the end of your trajectory might be nobody knows or cares what art is anymore, which I find highly problematic in that I still think there's a need for a language addressing specifics of objects. Another thing, you're talking about the robots, the artificial intelligence of the future. Right now, the reality we're facing is content moderators working in sweatshops for nothing, doing that filtering work, while the world thinks it's actually AI that's doing it. So I'm not sure, where exactly this will go.
We have a lovely face-off between the Pollyannish Sebastian and the dystopian here in the middle of the panel.
No,
but
I don't disagree.
I want Simon to weigh in on this.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's that radical flattening of content that we're talking about. Yeah, the leveling out, which in some narratives is a kind of opening up, and in other narratives is an emptying out. Right? This is what you're talking about, and I think with the onset of the so-called fake news scenario, this radical flattening of experience and of content, whatever that is something that I think we should be very aware about, and I think. One of the things which I think Artsy, it opens up a discourse, and you have this, editorial platform which is hugely read, right? But what is the? I would wonder then, what is the editorial model you're going for there? Like, what are the other publications you're modeling that on? Like, is it the Huffington Post of the art? This is the question that
Certainly in terms of pay, I can tell you that.
Well, and I guess catchy whatever headlines or whatever, and I guess what does that do to that kind of content or whatever? I have friends. There's lots of different people thinking lots of different things about these things, but I would wonder, what the model is for opening up. What is that?
No, I think it's a great question. So two things. First, in terms of where we end up, and is it all kind of sitting at home, et cetera? I think the answer is absolutely not. And I think we think of Artsy, for example, we have something called Artsy On-Site, where every month we look at, from our thousands of partners, who is doing the most interesting programming, and we do a database pool and see who are the people who are most interested, both collectors and kind of cultural influencers, and people who are, maybe just engaging on an educational level, and send them to these events. And so these things are happening, there's 2 in Miami this week, there's, I think there'll be 50 or 60 next year, and it didn't exist 18 months ago. And so I think the physical is an extension. It's just a better way of kind of matching the right people to the right physical or digital content. I think in terms of the model, I would say 2 things. The single most important thing is about quality and engagement. And we absolutely, and I don't know if our editor Marina's here, but we actually pay our writers, and we actually pay them quite well. And we believe that fewer, longer form is more engaging. We're not on on that. We have these debates about with investors of should you be on kind of the BuzzFeed side of the scale, or should you be on kind of the New York Times side of the scale? And I think one of the luxuries we have is because we are a business that is supported from subscriptions from galleries, museums, art fairs, etc., and then commissions when we sell directly on behalf of auction houses. On the editorial side, we can be kind of more focused on quality. And you get a daily email that has a 50% open rate, 4 or 5 minutes engaged reading times on articles, and I think it's just a focus on quality, and I would say accessibility. We very much, we do a little bit of more kind of inside baseball, really deep, etc. But we are really trying to open up the audience. I believe, the people who are reading art magazines and reading about art should be counted in the many tens of millions, not in the tens of thousands.
Well, we'd love that. Laurent, I want to go back to you. Talking about artificial intelligence, a word that seems to be this year's big buzz term, certainly. And going back to my initial premise that the technology is starting to catch up with the sophistication of what we're dealing with. At Google, are you beginning to look at this in terms of, curatorial work being supported by or perhaps even supplanted by technology?
Yes, so first, I'm always super cautious with prospective thinking or prophecies, especially on record, because 3 years later, how could I have been so wrong? But to explain where we are, just three...
You have to predict 20 years out.
Yeah, it's easier, yeah. Where we are in terms of machine learning, you're right, it's been a buzzword for, let's say, the past year and a half, within the engineering and tech world, of course, and within the art world, too. So what I've done about a month ago in Paris is to invite important engineers working on machine learning within the company, curators, and partners and artists in Paris for 2 days workshop, just to have everybody in the same room and trying to figure out where we are, what are the needs, what could we do better. I don't have all the answers yet, except that it was a very vibrant and exciting moment, I think, for everybody who attend. On our side, for sure, we have just published, you can access it online, we have just published a Google Arts and Culture experiment, some of them being based on some algorithm who would work around similarities across a large database of content in order to present new paths or new associations, unexpected ones, just maybe to have an unexpected layer of interaction or discovery before you access the artwork and the assets curated on the platform with all the metadata provided by the experts. It's working quite well. For example, we have one experience which is called X degrees of separation, and you select 2 images, very different one from the other, and the neural network would find the shorter path between those 2 images based on visual similarities, adding some other images from the database. So might look a bit gimmicky like that, but what we have seen for the past 2 months is that people who enter this kind of overwhelming amount of content today available on Google Arts and Culture, they find it a nice entry door, and they spend up to 10 minutes then on the platform to explore more curated or expert analysis. That's a way for me to start working around experimenting with machine learning. And then I think the real deal will be when we can train algorithms to support the work of curators, especially pre-sorting a large database of content.
But not just to be like a little controversial. I mean, if Big Blue can beat the world's greatest chess champion at chess or Go, why couldn't they do that when it comes to curating a really good exhibition?
Okay.
That's a deliberately controversial question, I just want to say.
I have to jump in here. So first of all, one thing we absolutely need to remember is that it's humans writing those algorithms. Yeah? And even if AI has a spectrum in which it can operate, humans seeded it and created the parameters. We see right now a lot of experimentation with AI in photography, in image cognition, IM, and other algorithms.
What's IM?
It's one of the softwares that basically trains the AI to make aesthetic decisions on photography.
Okay.
But do you see what comes out of...
Yes, I see what comes out.
This is a bit like telling people what they want to hear. This is this fake news phenomenon, right? Like
that's precisely where I'm getting at. If you look at the scores of 93% aesthetic high score, it's like National Geographic at its most standardized form, you know. So I can't help. I think it would be a great project to feed the software Zoe Leonard and others, because I think the high art would tank so terribly in the judgment of those algorithms. So I'm very skeptical about it, but I'm not saying that there couldn't be interesting AI being written.
But if you go with that, would it be your view that just as in the political life we have retreated into the corners, that in the aesthetic life the algorithm will force us to, or enable us or entice us to retreat into little separate bubbles of interest?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to think about what metrics we want, right? Like engagement, because something has a high level of response initially to a quick look, is that the only metric that we want to drag ourselves in the direction of, right? So, like, I mean, yeah, I think IM is a really great example of that, and it's really it's like you said, that the things that get people's attention are kind of minimal photographs with very little noise on them that look very kind of quiet and contemplative and whatever. And there's been conversations around the rise of abstract painting doing well in an Instagram age because it has this kind of similar thing as well. And if that's, you know, I think these are the kind of more hidden in the background things that are changing tastes and changing minds and changing engagement. And I think for those of us, particularly down this end of the panel, who are involved in maybe the architecture of what gets rewarded and what gets kind of what informs the decisions to put more resources in one direction than in another. I think, I would hope that it's not only advertising models and telling people what they want to hear that gets kind of reinforced, right? Because that's what leads us into the filter bubble, right?
Quick question. How many people have questions? I'm only going to take a few, but are there a few? Okay. We only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to ask one question, then I'm going to take two questions, and then we have a final question. The one question, which is a composite of many that I wanted to ask. So there are two parts of the art world, if you will, for the time being. The institutional museum side, let's say, and the market side. What are the two, for each of those sections, the market side or the institutional side, what is the biggest thing that they will have to unlearn or accept in order to keep up with this changing world that you're describing? You can choose which one. Let's start with museums. What is the biggest things museums will have to unlearn or adapt in their behavior in order to keep up with the world that we're talking about?
I think for institutions, it's proprietary thinking, and by that I mean the boundaries of both the art object and the audience, and how the interaction between them happens. I think that is a huge challenge that affects presentation, collection, and everything within the institution.
Anyone on institutions? Any other thoughts?
Actually, I had the same answer, and wanted maybe to underline that I think one of the most disruptive stuff that happened within this field, the knowledge field, is Wikipedia, which is quite ancient. But the whole idea of having access to knowledge through a bottom-to-top way of producing the content was, in my opinion, a giant disruption in this field for the past 20 years. In Versailles, when I was working at the Palace of Versailles, I invited the Wikimedia Foundation to work with the curatorial team just to explain how it works and how it's produced and how this content and this knowledge is produced. And that was, in my opinion, super disruptive for them.
I mean, certainly my experience working with museums is that the world that journalists have gotten used to, in which the audience is a real heavy driver of what happens, is still completely alien for the most part to museums. What about the market? I mean, what is it that the market is resisting the most from this world that's coming, do you think, Sebastian, as the representative of this new world?
Well, we do both sides, right? So we work with 700 museum partners as well as thousands of commercial partners. But I think the importance of data and what I think is good, right? Like, I think for my son, going back to him, he may be kind of losing against like Big Blue if he wants to become a curator or an art dealer. But I think we are at the very least in a transitional period, which maybe will be indefinite. And the reason that there is hope that it could be indefinite and that the role for humans could be, I think, more important is because there's so much about art that is storytelling and is context. And I don't think machines, I'm not seeing like machines write great novels and kind of write great short stories, etc. So I think that's a really hugely like kind of human thing. I think what there is, however, is galleries, art dealers in general need to embrace the data in addition to all the other market signals that they use, right? Like most people use signals like, going around the fair, what they read that has been written by people who go around the fair, often after staying out at parties really late and doing a pretty haphazard job of walking through a portion of the fair. And then like suddenly like the trend is X or the trend is Y, and it's not super rigorous. And I think you need to balance all that and all the insider information and all your networks and all your expert knowledge with data and analytics. And increasingly, I think people who are able to do those things will have a role to play. And I've had dealers say to me, like, don't take me out of the equation because it's just really boring. And by the way, I don't think you can do it. But if you give me data that gives me an unfair advantage, and it's kind of one more way for me to interpret and understand what's happening in the market, I think that's going to be interesting in the next few years.
Okay, we'll take a couple of quick questions. One over here. And if you, please say who you are if you'd like. Or
My name is Max Dolgetser, and you already asked, you read my mind 80% what I wanted to ask, so I distill my question to 20. We need to distinguish between the sort of commercial, marketplace, and institutional. So for the commercial, for the more transactional world, besides data analytics, what do you think need to happen so the question mark at the title of this panel will disappear within the next 36 months, besides data analytics? Data analytics obviously is an important piece, but besides this, what can accelerate adoption? What would you like to see happen?
I don't think the question mark exists. So I fundamentally disagree with the question mark. But maybe I'll let others talk about what they think additionally needs to happen. I mean, I have a giant long wish list. You know, I remember having a conversation with a very prominent New York gallery owner who has one of the best galleries in the world, and who told me in, I think it was 2013, said, Sebastian, I think we should talk because I think you're right that the internet is not going away. And my thinking when you have a conversation like that is, my God, we almost like went out of business, and if people kind of, the things that sometimes take 2 or 3 years, if people kind of embrace those things faster, then I think that's really good. But often it's just like one conversation at a time. I spent in the early days so much time on planes just like meeting with one skeptical person after another. And that just, it doesn't scale super well, but I think it's so necessary. In the art world, which is so relationship driven, I think that part of just like people, getting some utility out of kind of this new paradigm. So whether it's, an artist, we had our Artsy's general counsel who left to start a great gallery, Hometown Art, which I'll plug. And he sold a piece. He was originally like, well, I'm going to be like a cool downtown gallery, so I don't know, if I should be on Artsy or not, etc. I'm going to like wait a little bit. And then he came on and he sold works to Lithuanian collectors that came in through Artsy. And so suddenly he's a proponent because it's helping his business. And I think the same ways, as people start to get utility and view these platforms as tools to help them advance their own objectives, whatever they might be, I think that's ultimately what changes minds and drives adoption.
There's one over there, and then afterwards, John.
Hello, my name is Laurent Mensa. I'm actually a project manager with a design firm in New York called Local Projects. We are a studio that's very prototype technology first focused, and our main clientele are cultural institutions and museums. I have an engineering background, so the idea of the development process and prototyping is very second nature to me, but I find that when working with these clients specifically, it's hard for them to understand that process. They want to integrate technology into their experiences and their spaces, but they don't really understand the process to do that. So what are your thoughts on making the development process a bit more palatable for them and integrating technology into their spaces?
Yeah, I think it's a huge learning curve. You're absolutely right. As a curator of digital art, you're facing the same problem because artists are suddenly coming in and want to do user testing, you know, which sounds so industry, but is absolutely necessary for creating the experience that they want. And I think it's really teaching institutions the necessity of doing that and coming up with, I think, non-intrusive models of creating little test cases for people. I think museums and institutions are really scared about companies moving in and letting something loose on the public in an unmediated way. So basically working on smaller test groups with them and creating scenarios, I think is crucial, both for an art experience and other sectors.
Laurent?
Yeah, I totally agree. And so it's a problem I don't have because I have the luxury of having a space for research and development, fast prototyping, and then the resources of a company like Google to scale it. So, but I've been fascinated for the past 10 years about the creativity, energy of many project prototypes in the museum. Let's just think about the way museums and institutions have embraced social. It's kind of crazy. They could actually be teaching many private companies about how to create a genuine conversation online around art and culture. But they seem to be stuck because they probably don't work all together. They've been to be stuck after the prototyping, after the first successes. They don't seem to be able to scale it and really change the way they are working on a more scalable basis, which is something they should address, in my opinion, by working more together.
Front row.
Hi, my name is John Mattson. I'm CEO of .art. And Andres, thanks for sharing a little bit about our start here early in the conversation. But as you said, Sebastian, the internet, is pretty much here to stay. And one of the things that we're focused on is how you can use the internet and technology for cultural preservation. And I'd be interested in your perspectives on how digital copies and how collectors or how the art world views the new use of an authorized copy of an artwork to survive long term, because the physical has its limitations, and how you see that coming into technology and in the art world.
It's actually an area I'm deeply involved in. I think over the past 20 years we have made massive progress on the preservation of digital art. It would be more than a topic for a panel. There are so many consortia from the Variable Media Network to Matters in Media Art that have established the standards of storage, migration, emulation, and recreation. I think emulators are really going to be the future for many art projects. Every conservator will, of course, tell you that there's no silver bullet. You have to make a case-by-case decision about this. But I mean, if you look it up, there have been major conferences at the Guggenheim. There's one in Paris coming up with the Bibliothèque Nationale next week, and I think I feel much safer about the preservation of art for the future than about other areas of presentation.
Great. I think there's one over there. That will be the last one for now. Yes?
I'm an independent curator and I work in new media, and about 10 years ago nobody was really interested in dealing with art that had technology involved because people didn't know how to either guarantee parts because of obsolescence. I work with the guys who made the Rain Room, and everything has changed in the last, I would say, since Rain Room. Instagram has become sort of the medium of our time. But my question, after having lived with that piece in LA, New York, and Shanghai, people come, they take a photo, they leave. They engage very differently depending on the culture. But I'm all for new media. I just wonder, how do we slow down to have a real engagement where people are actually reflecting and engaging in a deeper level other than vidi selfie. I'm a little bit afraid. I love Artsy and I love reading about art. I love the access, but I wonder, where the future, next generations are going to go when everything is on the feed and so fast. I feel we almost need to pause and zoom out before we zoom back in, and I just wonder how you guys feel about it.
So how do we slow it down?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure if that is the right approach, because you can't slow down the world. At the same time, I also think that we're right now in a process of rewriting art history. So I must say, I'm older, admittedly, so I've been curating this art for 20 years, and it happened in the 60s. I mean, you have the key exhibitions of this medium, like Cybernetic Serendipity and others, curated throughout the 60s, the work that was at New Tendencies. So we have 50 years of history of this and this acceleration. And I think we're still in the process of rewriting that history, of telling it, and that is what's absolutely necessary. To me, the worst thing that could happen would be that people think this happened starting with Rain Room, because there are decades before then, and that is part of the slowing down, really looking at the long, long history of it. I know that you didn't mean to say that, and that whatever enters the mainstream is also making a big change. Pokemon made a huge difference for artists working in AR because they suddenly didn't have to explain it anymore.
I'm sorry, I think we're sort of starting to be, okay, we'll take one more question. The questions are great, by the way, thank you. And we are going to stick around for a few minutes after the panel for those of you who would still like directly to ask a question. One more from the gentleman there.
Hi, Robert Norden, CEO of Verisat. Great panel. I remember in '95 I was at AOL and launching our shopping channel in the UK. Back then, people's problems were essentially trust. Do I trust putting my credit card in the computer? We've come a huge, long way. But if you look at the art market online, it's still a tiny fraction of the overall business. I mean, it's less than 5%. Why do you think that is? What are the problems of trust that you think are holding back wider confidence in terms of consumers feeling happy to buy art? And secondly, what potential do you think the blockchain has to address these issues of trust?
So first, in terms of the art market and kind of transaction volume is a very loosely defined term. And, when I was at Christie's, we were selling art online, sending someone a JPEG that they got on their BlackBerry and that they were buying without seeing. And so you could argue that that's part of the online art market. Or even on a platform like Artsy, you have everything from someone seeing a work, inquiring on it, and then going back and forth on email or on a phone call, and how much is that part of the art market? And then you have the hardcore e-commerce, like someone clicking bid on Sotheby's.com or on Artsy.net and an auction, etc. And I think the part of the market that is touched by online is much, much bigger. I think to the question of trust, I'd say two things. I think there will definitely be some kind of authentication technology. It might be blockchain. It may be something like unique URLs like .art is doing. I think it will probably be as part of a platform. We obviously hope it will be Artsy, but there's others out there as well. And then I think there's also something about how do you help people get more comfortable? I mean, I get a lot of questions like for existing collectors, whether they do research and then call a gallery with a relationship they have or call up on the phone, they generally they find Artsy and they use it because there's just so much content there that is helpful for them, right? If they want to see the 20 fairs that are going on this week, it may be impossible, but maybe you can kind of start to narrow down what you want to see on Artsy. But I think for people who are just starting out, it's a more interesting question. And there you have people who are, who write me and say, hey, I want to collect art, I have some money, but I don't know where to begin. And on the one hand, you're like, well, I've spent 6 years working on this thing, and there's this website, and what are we doing wrong? And I think there's some amount of hand-holding that's necessary to kind of get people comfortable. And so that's something that we're starting to think about more, whether it's, kind of some individual to help you kind of navigate the website in some virtual way. I think there's a big opportunity there that kind of can overcome that activation energy of getting someone comfortable with kind of engaging on a deeper level and starting to buy art.
Well, thank you. Exhaustive answer. We're not done. Closing questions. So first of all, it's been great. I mean, this is a moving target, this digital thing, but I think we really hit on a lot of themes. But just to close it down, little question to each of you, and it goes like this. So the year is 2046, and some researchers in some digital archive come across a copy of this conversation and they watch it. What do you think will surprise them the most? We'll start with Laurent.
I think and I hope they would be laughing a lot, saying they were so wrong.
Christiane.
Well, I'm not sure if they will say, wow, they were already thinking about that at this time, or just laugh and say they didn't see it coming at all, in terms of where, AI or the social media landscape is going. I would hope that today is a reality check and we're getting more thoughtful in developing the technologies, and they will actually see great value in what we talked about, but that's a hope.
Sebastian, what will they find unique about our moment, and what will they think about our panel?
Well, first I'd say they're going to have time to view it because they're not going to be busy kind of working, etc. And then two, yeah, I think we'll probably be completely wrong about absolutely everything, except that I really do believe in this idea of kind of ascending Maslow's hierarchy, and it could get very dystopian, but to be an entrepreneur, you have to be a glass overwhelmingly over full kind of mentality, and so I think it will somehow work out just fine.
Simon, the first word was yours, the last word is yours.
I think people in the future coming across this will be most surprised by the discrepancy between where we feel we are politically and where we are actually acting politically. I think that's going to be the biggest discrepancy.
Well, on that, I don't know, Pollyannish or dystopian note, thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists, and enjoy the fair.